Just like other C-inspired programming languages, JavaScript also supports the standard index-based for loop format. Consider a simple array of people, each with their own name, Jane, John, and Jack. We can actually loop through the items of the array quite easily by using the JavaScript for loop. The standard for loop consists of the for keyword, followed by an initialization statement, followed by a conditional termination expression, and an afterthought statement. The for loop comes with a body block, and you can put as many statements as you want within that. The objective of this simple for loop is to log the names of all of the persons within the people array. Here's how the basic for loop runs. It starts off by running the initialization statement. Next, it checks if the condition expression is true, and if it is, then it runs the body of the for loop. Next, it runs the afterthought statement, and then we basically start to loop around, checking the expression. If it's true, running the body, running the afterthought, and this loop will continue as long as the condition expression continues to be true. In our simple example, we are starting off at index 0. We look up the person from the array using the index and log out the person name. Next, we increment the index by 1, and if index is still within the bounds of the array, we repeat the process till index is no longer less than the length of the array, at which point we terminate the loop. You might recall that JavaScript arrays are 0 indexed, which is why we start the loop at 0 and terminate it at length -1, also known as index less than length. A little known fact about the standard for loop is that the initialization, the condition, and afterthought sections are actually all optional. So instead of using the initialization section of the for loop, we could initialize a variable externally, and this would function exactly the same as if we had written let index is equal to 0 within the for loop. Here we are starting at index 0 and terminating before 5, so we can see on the console we have a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Similarly, instead of using the afterthought section of the for loop, we could do whatever modification we need to make within the for loop and leave that section out from the for loop, and this functions the same as if we had put that statement in the afterthought. And we can even take the condition expression and leave that out to truly prove that all of these sections are optional. Now in this particular case, since there is no terminating condition, this particular program will execute indefinitely, logging incrementing numbers to the console till of course we exit the program. Modern JavaScript comes with a for-off loop that allows you to conveniently loop through arrays and other iterables in a simpler fashion when compared to the traditional index-based for loop. Here we have the same array of people, Jane, John, and Jack, and we are using an index-based for loop to log the person names. We can actually achieve the same functionality with the more modern JavaScript for-off loop. The for-off loop consists of the for keyword followed by a variable declaration, followed by the off keyword, followed by the item that we want to iterate over. Here we are iterating over the people array, and for each iteration of the loop, we are storing an individual item into the person variable. So the first time this loop runs, person is going to be the object that contains the name property with Jane. The next time is going to be the object with John, and finally it will be the object with Jack. In each iteration of the loop within the loop body, we are logging out the person's name. So functionally, it is going to be the same as the index-based for loop that we wrote before, but as you can see, it is much neater. Since we don't need an index variable, we don't need to do ++, and we can use const to declare the current item up front. There is less likelihood of making silly mistakes, so unless you have an explicit use case for the index variable, in modern JavaScript, for-off is the way to go. All JavaScript for loops support early termination with the use of the break statement. Consider a simple array consisting of a few places around the world. We also have a separate array consisting of a few favorites. Our mission is to find the first place that also exists within our favorites array. For this, we loop through the places with a simple for-off loop, and then we loop through the favorites within that using another for-off loop. If at any point the place that we are looking at is the same as the favorite that we are looking at, congratulations, we have found a match. Now that we have found our answer, it would be useless to continue to loop through the favorites. We can exit out of the for loop by using the break statement. To demonstrate that the for loop will exit, let's put a simple log statement so that we can be sure that we are not looking at any more items. Now once we have the match, there's no point in looping through the places either, so we will make sure that if we have a match, we will break out of that for loop as well. Finally, at the end of the two for loops, we log out the match that we have found. If you look at the two arrays, the only thing that is common is Tokyo, so we should look at Paris, London, and Tokyo from places, first being compared to Beijing and then being compared to Tokyo, and the loops terminating. And when we run this code, that is exactly what happens. Thanks to the break statements, we terminate the loops as soon as the match is found. You can use the continue statement to jump to the next iteration of the loop, essentially skipping over the rest of the loop body for the current iteration. Consider the simple task of printing out numbers 0 to 14, but skip the log if the number is divisible by 3 or if it is divisible by 5. We can iterate from 0 to 14 with the simple index-based for loop. Within the loop, we check if the index is divisible by 3, and if it is, we skip the remaining body with the continue statement. We can do the same thing with the other requirement as well, so if the index is divisible by 5, we skip over the body with the continue statement. Finally, for all of the other index values, we simply log them to the console. If we run this code, you can see that it matches our expectations. Anything that is divisible by 3 or 5 is not getting logged to the console. JavaScript also comes with a for in loop, but it's more of a traditional feature that you really want to use in modern JavaScript, as there are better ways to achieve the same effect. The for in loop is designed to be used with objects, so here we have a simple object called point that has properties x, y, and z with values 3, 1, and 2. As you might recall from our lesson on objects, we can actually use the strings x, y, and z to look up the values of these properties from the point object. Using a string in such a fashion is called a key, and that is exactly what is returned in each iteration of the for in loop. So when we iterate over the point object using a for in, it'll be the string x, then the string y, and then the string z. We can use this key to look up the value for that property from the point object. For x it will be 3, for y it will be 1, and for z it will be 2. Let's log out the key and the value for each iteration of the loop, and as you can see, it matches our expectations. We have the keys x, y, and z with values 3, 1, and 2. Now, as I mentioned, the for in loop is sort of found within modern JavaScript because it's really up to you to make sure that when you get the key, you get the value for that corresponding key. Fortunately, there is a function on the object module that does this association for you up front, decreasing the chances of mistakes. The object.entries function takes an object and returns an array of tuples with each item containing the key and the value already associated for you. So if we have this array, we can actually just use our standard for off loop to loop through these entries, each time destructuring the keys and the values into their appropriate variables. So if we log out the keys and the values again, you can see that this for off is equivalent to the previous for in. Additionally, object.entries works more reliably compared to for in when it comes to modern JavaScript features like symbols. Many times when you are working with arrays in JavaScript and you want to loop through the items, instead of using the for loop, you can actually just use the array built-in methods. Consider this very simple array of car manufacturers. We can log out the cars with a very simple for off loop, and for each car we use console.log. Now instead of the for off, we could just as easily do cars.forEach and pass that individual item to console.log. The JavaScript for off loop and the forEach array method both achieve the same thing, and it's up to you to decide which one looks better for you. I personally like the forEach in this particular example. There are other cases where the JavaScript array built-in methods can drastically save you from writing a lot of code within a for off yourself. As an example, consider the boolean has Audi, which we want to be true if the cars array contains Audi. We can determine this quite easily by looping through all of the cars, checking if the car is equal to Audi, and if it is, then has Audi is equal to true, and we can break from this for loop. But there is a JavaScript array method that can achieve the same effect with lesser code. We use the findIndex method to see if any car is equal to Audi, and if the response from findIndex is not equal to -1, that means that we have found a result, and therefore has Audi needs to be true. So the guidance is, if you need to do something complicated that depends upon multiple inputs, then use the for loop. Otherwise, if it is something that falls into a category of an array utility method, then just use the method. A key reason why you might prefer a for off loop over the array for each is that for each does not support early termination, but you can use another array iteration method to achieve the same effect of continue and break in a more functional programming inspired pattern. Consider a simple input array consisting of a few numbers. With the for loop, we want to skip if the value is 2, terminate the for loop if the value is 5, otherwise log the value to the console. We can loop through the input with the simple for off loop. If the value is equal to 2, we continue to skip. If the value is 5, we break the loop with break, otherwise we log the value to the console. So for this input array, the loop will print 3, skip over 2, print 7 and 4, and then terminate at 5. And if we run this code, that is exactly what we see on the console. No surprises here. Let's see how we can achieve the same effect with a simple array iteration method. For the array iteration methods, if you want to continue, you're pretty much going to simply return from the callback function, but the difficulty is in the break statement, and for that, we need to utilize the fact that some of the array iteration methods will stop iterating as soon as they have the answer that they are looking for. The simplest example is the find method, so we can actually loop through the input with the find method. If the value is equal to 2 and we want to just jump to the next item, we do a simple return. Otherwise, if you want to terminate, for example, on value is equal to 5, we simply return true, and this signals to find that, hey, we have found our item, which essentially terminates the loop. For all other items, we simply follow our requirement and log the value. As you can see, the output from forOff matches the find method. For both of these, we see 374. Personally, I would just use the forOff loop, but bending functions to your will is a pattern worth knowing, if only to understand the existing codebases out there. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. As always, thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the next one.